My Lord Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2020 Worshipful Company of Architects Annual Lecture. It's to be given by Darren Comber of Global Architectural Practice, Scott Brownrigg. And to optimise your experience in view of the speakers during the whole event, please remain muted with your cameras turned off. We're delighted to welcome over 100 guests tonight, including around 70 masters and representatives from the city livery companies, as well as members and students of the Architects Company, to our first ever online lecture. You are all most welcome. The money raised from this event will be distributed evenly between the Lord Mayor's charity and our own student COVID-19 hardship fund. On the 26th of March, at the start of the UK lockdown, Masters of Livery Companies received a heartfelt letter from the Lord Mayor, and I shared this letter with members of the Architects Company, passing on the Mayor's request for livery companies to develop ideas to help tackle COVID-19 and inviting us as a city livery community to share best practice and help one another during this challenging time. This idea that we're talking about tonight was in response to that request, and liveryman Helen Taylor suggested that we should work collaboratively with one of our leading member practices, Scott Brownrigg, on a research project aimed at minimising the spread of contagion through design. This lecture forms part of that collaboration with the Mayor, and I am delighted to call upon the Lord Mayor to introduce the event, and whilst doing so, present the winner of the Architects Benevolent Society plate for their charitable work, raising money for the Society.
Thank you very much for those kind words, Valerie, and thank you to your company for organising today's lecture. It's true, at the beginning of lockdown, I asked all the livery companies of London to muster the full force of their collective experience and expertise to tackle coronavirus. And I'm delighted that this company has responded so well to that ask. Of course, I am also delighted that in the Great Ward of Bread Street, your hall equivalent is the Temple Bar. And I'm very excited that so many members of your company have joined the Bread Street Wall Club, and look forward to meeting you in person at the Temple Bar off Paternoster Square. Now, today's lecture will explore together with Darren Comber, CEO of Scott Brownrigg, how the art of architecture can help limit the spread and impact of future epidemics. At the end of the lecture, there will be a Q&A session. This is an opportunity for all of you on this call to contribute to the research by providing your own experience and expertise, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. However, before we start today's lecture, I have an important job to do. Like many professions across the UK, architecture has been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. It is therefore important that those of us who can do support others in the profession with managing the financial and mental challenges that have come with this pandemic. That is why it gives me great pleasure to present this year's Architects Benevolent Society Award. Every year, the Architects Company presents an award to the member or members who have raised the most money for the Architects Benevolent Society that year. The money that members raised will go supporting past and present architects during times of need. The annual prize is a plate, which is designed by one of the members of the Architects Company. This year, the plate has been designed by liveryman Chris Williamson, one of the founding partners of Weston and Williamson, an internationally renowned architectural practice specializing in transportation projects. Chris has designed a wonderful plate depicting Temple Bar, which I can show you a template of now. Hopefully you can see that. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to virtually present this prize to Michael Dougal of Archie Velo for the Air Charity Bike Ride. Now, Michael, have you turned your camera on so that everyone can see you? Hopefully you can. So I will hold it up. As you can see, I will now pass this across And there we go. Perfect. It worked brilliantly, Michael. You have the plate. As you can see, Michael has the finished plate to hand, a truly wonderful piece of artistry. This plate is a reward for the 18 individuals from across the UK's construction industry who set off from Glasgow on Friday the 6th of September to raise money for the Architects Benevolent Society. Their aim was to cover the 460 miles between Glasgow and London in just 4 days via a route that crossed the hills of the Lake District, Peak District and the forests of Bowland. Across the 4 days, the group experienced some of the most challenging cycling roads in the UK, but thankfully, due to favourable conditions, they were also able to enjoy some fantastic scenery. The group arrived back safely in London at 7 p.m. on Monday, the 9th of September, to a very warm welcome from the team at New London Architecture. For their bike ride, they were given a cheque made out to the Architects Benevolent Society for a staggering sum of £11,530.66. As a token of thanks to all the members, 18 smaller plates have been manufactured for each of them, and these will be distributed later. So to Michael and his team, a very big congratulations and thank you on behalf of the City of London. The money you raise will no doubt be a lifeline for many struggling architects and their families during this difficult time. Thank you. And back to you, Valerie.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Michael and the team for their excellent fundraising efforts. So, on the 14th of April 2020, just 3 weeks after the UK went into lockdown, Scott Brownrigg announced it was diverting all the resources of its design research unit into tackling the spread of contagion through architectural design in the built environment. It's already in discussion with a number of academics and research professionals and bodies, and as signatories to the UN Global Compact, its CEO, Darren Comber, has reached out to the United Nations. London is a world city, and we need to think and act globally to solve the challenges posed by COVID-19. As I mentioned before, around 70 livery companies are represented at this evening's lecture, and we're particularly keen to use the Q&A session after this lecture as a forum for contributing great ideas to the research. So if you have a question to ask or any insights to add to the discussion, please send it privately to the host, Claire Donald, via the chat function. The questions will be collated and presented to Darren in the session, and you will be credited with the question. Since the 14th of April, Scott Brownrigg's Design Research Unit has produced numerous learned papers, articles in magazines, newspapers, participated in interviews on TV and the wider media, both championing and exploring how architecture and the built environment can help limit the spread and the impact of future pandemics. Scott Brownrigg has reached over 148 million people on COVID-19 issues by virtue of its work, and it is undoubtedly a world leader. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce Darren Comber, the Chief Executive of Scott Brownrigg, to share his thinking on this really important subject. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you, Valerie. Let's share my screen. I'll tell you what that wheel is in a second. But let's just start again. So obviously with a 110-year history, we have a lot of opportunity to interface across the world. But also what is important is thinking about that history, to look back, thinking about our future direction, but also acknowledge that the past doesn't define where you're going to go, but it does give a lot of insight into how you might actually then change what you're doing into the future. So a little bit about how we do that. We've always had a great history of interfacing with the commercial world, and that's been really, really important because as architects, yes, it's really important to win architectural awards and have all of those sort of things going on, but it's also important to consider how you can interface with the wider commercial community. And we are the only architecture firm listed in the stock exchange, companies to inspire Europe. So they choose 170 companies, a good example. We sit on the RABA committee, we're a practice role model, all of those sort of things have combined. And we also have been twice now in the Sunday Times Top 200 tracker, which there's only 3 architects that are actually in that. So we've put a lot of energy into actually interfacing and seeing where we might take the company as a whole, but also how we can contribute back into society and not just have it as awards of the architecture we've actually done. Sustainability is absolutely key as well, and you may have wondered what that first slide was when you actually did eventually see it. And it's a wind turbine, so we designed a wind turbine. It's 400 feet high, and it was sitting in New York. And we're in the process of designing and seeing how we can actually make that happen. So these sort of things really matter to us. But it's the big impact opportunities that we really invest so much time in. And something like this, which is the Coastal Improvement Program in New York, which will look at how can we stop future floods. So it isn't about just thinking about what do we do today, it's about thinking about the future and how we can make a more positive future out of all of this. Other things that go back in our history, the sustainability aspect is really important because we shouldn't lose sight of it now. In many ways, it is the key to unlocking a lot of the things that we're going to experience as we move towards a more positive nature and attitude. And as Valerie quite rightly pointed out, we're the only UK architect that signed up to the Global Compact Charter, which doesn't just look at sustainability, it actually looks at the wider sense of the human rights aspects right the way across the globe. And we put a lot of energy and effort into that. So we're not a one-dimensional company. We do look at how we can influence across so many things. But obviously building buildings and being technologically advanced is really, really important to us. And things like the Williams Formula One team, who are one of our clients, and we're working with them very closely. When the pandemic came about, I reached out to them. And I said, how can you help us with materials technology? Are there things in Formula One that you can do? Yes, we've all seen the press of masks being built or ventilators, but this was about saying, let's look to the future. This is the here and now, but can we look at, through material technology, whether it be airflows and using their wind testing apparatus to look at how we can minimize the spread of contagions. And they embraced it, and they brought us in with a number of other companies that they were working with. So that was very, very positive. And also the major infrastructure program. So being a company with so many sectors, looking at airports and how we travel is really, really important. And obviously this is an image you can see of our design for Heathrow, the new terminal, which now is under great question, clearly, whether that's actually going to happen. But the issues around it are still very prevalent, and the fact that we all still want to travel. So I was asked to look also, as well as looking about where we're going to go in the future, I'm going to try and give you a little bit of insight in what we're looking at, what's the longer term aspects of future for us, but also focus in a little bit on what's the here and now. So there's short term and then there's a long term aspects that we really, really need to consider. So let's look at the workplace first. And rather like the first slide, let's just have a quick reflection, because we always think now we're in this obviously all the strange settings. Some of us have gone back to our studios or offices, whether it's temporarily, but most of us are working from home. But let's just think for a second what the office used to be like for us. So I'm just going to go back to when I started at Scott Brownrigg. So it's 25 years ago now. And when I was starting there, and some of the things in there that you can see in orange are the things that we now are really relying on. So the internet was a big game changer. Home working was prophesized. I don't think 25 years ago we prophesized that we would literally all be at home, but it was that idea of that there would be a lot more working from home. And you know, there's a new idea then, let's all have open plan in offices, which you can question whether that's a good idea or not now. Clearly it has its limitations, but it is actually again part of the key. But the one thing that we're going to rely on when we go back is that flexibility driving the spatial design. When I started, I used one of these. That isn't me, but I certainly worked on one of those. We had 2 computers in the office. You could smoke at your desk. I mean, imagine that now, smoking at your desk. Or we had to provide these in the offices, which seems absolutely insane now, but that was the environment that we worked in. In addition, sorry, I have now got a slight malfunction here. here we go. That was it. It was the age of conspicuous consumption. 4-pipe fan calls were everything that was in the offices. It used to pump round diseases around the offices. So if you got a cold in the office, everyone got it. And it was one of those things that we sort of joked about then, saying, yeah, we've got air conditioning. If one person gets a cold, everyone gets it. Well, it's not so funny now. And it was very much that age of conspicuous consumption, and sustainability and all the things we're seeing now simply weren't on the agenda. Everyone wanted Natrium. Trump wanted the biggest in the world. And, you know, we swallowed up all of that public space that was available to us in Manhattan, that actually few previous pandemics had actually designed into the cities. So the result of previous pandemics had actually put a lot more public space into it, but now it was a case of actually we're using it up for our actual consumption. In the UK, it was the rise of the business park, but that was nothing new. The Greeks had the agoras, and we spent 30 years developing Packville Business Park, and it became the blend that mixed use. If it wasn't mixed use, it didn't actually work. So you had to have this range of uses. And again, the reason I'm showing this is because all of these things are what we're seeing now, and what we're experiencing is things that we have to go back to. The offices, though, they look like workers' houses, and if you were lucky enough, you had a big one that looked like the chairman's house. But they all had to be very, very one-dimensional in how they were delivered. Technology then arrives, and business parks have to look super technological. We had computers that designed them in a certain way, but they still had to have pitch roofs because people were comfortable with them feeling like their houses, which is, for me, again, slightly odd, but it is the way that it was. So then, as little as 15 years ago, let's think about this. This was when sustainability really came onto the agenda, and it was only really about then. And suddenly, we're all gripped by, we want to be part of this green revolution, and this is the way that we're going to see it go forward. In 2005, I chaired the unit on sustainability in Paris, and that quote there came from the project manager who was the client from Swiss Re, who was responsible for the Gherkin in the city. And this was really quite interesting because it was a case of saying that nobody really wants this. We can't actually generate income from it or more rent from it. Why are we going to do it? Well, I think that that's going to come back to us. And I think there's a sense that actually, if we don't design our buildings and spaces more responsibly now, then they won't actually happen. And that has to be what we work towards. So it changed when the funds, so the city funds said, we won't lend you the money unless your buildings and spaces can demonstrate sustainable credentials. And that brought about a major, major change in what we were doing. And in a way, that's what a pandemic does. It brings across a major change that wouldn't otherwise happen if we carried on in the way that we're doing. So will it change? Will we have to do it? Well, we'll see. But I really do think that it will be a responsibility for everybody to then look at how we do it. So that was then. Where are we now? So only 3 months ago, we were super technologically dependent. We still are now, and we're even more so now, one could argue. And there was a focus on people and well-being. And that was a major change that we saw, because before it was all about capitalism and making things super sophisticated, but the people are what really, really matter in society. And we've seen how people are getting together and helping each other. And that, again, is such a key thing of how we will go through and get this moving again. There's an acceptance as well that there is not one size that fits all. The workforce, people all have to coexist together. And we have started to embrace this whole workforce dichotomy and accepting that by 2025, over 50% of the workforce will be over 50, which is a huge change in terms of our attitudes. We always think that's just the kids at Facebook, but that isn't the case. We have to provide an environment for everyone to look at. And that comes through things like this, the work style profiler, understanding how does that space work, using cognitive scientists to actually embrace and see how those things can come together. And then we've developed these little avatars that look at how you as individuals can work within those spaces. Open plan was the key thing. And now, again, Is that the way forward? Well, again, we're going to see, because that is a major, major challenge. Getting everybody back into the offices is challenging to spatially get people so close together. And people are saying they really don't want to be that much closer together anymore. But it wasn't new. If you look back, I mean, this is in the 50s. People were packed in then. So a lot of these new things that we bring in and we think, yeah, we've got this whole new way of working now, has been done before. And there were different ways of embracing it. Everything had to be smart, a smart city, big data. All of these things have prepared us for the future that we're now going to go into. So smart buildings, smart cities, if it wasn't smart, it was kind of not really wanted. And that, I think, is a bit of a shame, because it was just using a buzzword, and half the time you look into it, you think that isn't a smart city. It doesn't embrace the aspects that we really need. But when we think about automation and zone deliveries are already happening. This isn't a case of, oh, we might see them now. We're already working with Amazon, and we are designing zone corridors into our master plans. We have been doing it for some time. So this will actually accelerate some of that pace of change. And technology reduces the areas that we have in our offices, and effectively even the need for a physical office. So we can work anywhere, which brings us up to date where we are now, because then we have COVID-19. So accepting that we've already prepared ourselves for this, suddenly we have a situation where we're all working at home. And I just thought I'd put that in for you, because if home is where we make it, and I don't know whether you can all read that down the side, I think there may be some boxes over the side, but now the office is really wherever you want to make it for yourself. And I'm really fortunate. That's been my view for the last 12 weeks. Isn't such a bad view, but it's the view, you don't want to look at it every single day. And having some sort of ability to change your work settings is fundamental. And it's also fundamental that you can interact with people as well. So we locked down, we're all there, and bringing you now into the research that we're doing, so setting the scene for that. But then this is really, really important, because a crisis is another form of change, but it does bring opportunities. When I say opportunities, these aren't something that necessarily we want to have, but you can make a positive difference by evaluating some of those opportunities. And as a practice, we had two things that we had to do. And I'm sure it's like many, many other businesses, but as CEO, my first responsibility was make sure we survive. Because if we can have all the best ideas in the world, but if we can't get through this and there was no opportunity of defining how long this was going to last, we wouldn't be around to see any of that anyway. And then the other facet, so these were the two. How could we as architects contribute to making a positive change? And thinking about, we don't want to feel powerless, we're not doctors, we don't have certain skills that we can do, but as architects, we have the responsibility in the built environment to really be looked to and make that change. Because if we're not going to do it, no one's going to do it. So they were the two key criteria. So first off, we put into place our own social working system. So this looks incredibly confusing, I accept, but right in the middle, that's the leadership. Everyone's houses revolve around it, and we developed a way that everybody could stay connected. And that's really, really important in terms of keeping the business in a position where we can actually do the things we want to do. The second part, and this is the part that was really the most important part for me, I came in having closed all 8 of our offices globally. We're in New York, we're in Singapore, we're in Amsterdam, and then we have 5 UK offices. And having closed them all, I sat down and thought, right, this is what we need to do. We need to now rise to the challenge and our responsibility and see how we can do that. And we have embedded within the company what's called the Design Research Unit. Now, some of you may just know this, but you probably don't know that we designed the British Rail logo, which is probably one of the most recognised logos you'll see across the world. Things like the Unilever logo and every bit of signage you see on the right-hand side, if it's on your right-hand side, was designed by us. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because it gives you a lot of access to many, many different professions across the industry. We built that up over a long, long period. And it gave us then the platform to think, right, we can now bring in different companies. So I mentioned the Williams Formula One team, but that's only one of many, many, many that we reached out to see how we could minimise the spread of contagions through what we're doing. And on the left-hand side there, we developed a 10-point plan. And I can only touch on a few of those this evening, but I'm happy if any of you want to reach out to me afterwards. If one of those is of particular interest to you, or you have a skill, please contact us as a company and we will happily interface with you. But some of the things that are really, really important. So the prediction modelling and digital twin testing I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about collaborations, and then also how the office space may change for us in terms of getting back into it, and touch on how we might get ourselves around the city a little bit. So here's the first one really. So on the far left, having designed airports all over the world, and Istanbul National Airport was designed by us. It's the largest airport in the world, and it has specifically been designed, and it was designed through computer modelling to be able to be sequentially shut down if things like contagion spread. Because it's a hub terminal, it means that you may have to close it down at certain times. So it proves, so evidence-based design proves that it actually works. So we were able to make that work. Will you ever travel like that on a plane again for a while? I suspect not, but we'll come back to that one. Cycling has been an amazing thing for everybody. Has started to cycle through the city. We're using our cities in a different way. And that photo at the bottom of your screen is now our office reception. So we've said, well, yes, it's lovely to see all of our work in the reception, but it's more important to make it easy to cycle in and get into your office. So we've turned it into a bike store, and we're making best use of it. We also designed the transport hubs. So it was designed by us, Green Park, and a whole number of others, Victoria, blah, blah, blah. And the prediction modelling testing that we do, we are now using with TfL to look at how can we get back onto the rail network in a more safe way, and how can we use that modelling to look at how contagions can spread within environments. And that's another important facet as well. So I'll come on to that now then. So digital twin. Some of you may be familiar with what a digital twin is, but some may not, which is why I put that image up. Effectively, a digital twin is a digital model, an exact replica of the physical element. And why is that something we can use to our advantage? Well, what we can do is we can create real-time assessments of either spaces internally or whole master plans to look at, if a contagion happens, how can we model it to see how quickly it will spread? So we're able to use that both in our buildings and also in our master planning environments. So we're interfacing with everyone from the Civil Aviation Authority right the way through to people who want to look at their offices and look at airflows in offices to say, if the air is over here and it becomes contaminated, how quickly will it spread over to the other section? So it's a huge dynamic in terms of the business that we have within the company to be able to do that. So this is something that we deployed very much into it. The other thing was then more of a human scale. So thinking about the vast numbers of people that are either in quarantine or have to self-isolate or are shielding, and they're away from their families. So what could we do? So we looked at deploying our skills with engineers to develop what we've called the social contact pod, and it allows people to interface with each other in a safe environment where some of these people will be shielding, and we're told by the doctors, for at least another 12 months. Now, we might not be doing that, but there will be a big percentage of society that will be doing that, and we'll need some way of being able to interface with each other. So here it is, you can see a bit of a plan and a section of how that works. We have a film membrane that you can actually hold hands with people. You can't physically touch, but these things can will happen. And it will come out as something like this, where you will be able to clean the air in it. So it'll have a whole different way of being able to service. And also, the key thing is we're now building them. And so the social contact pod, let me just finish on telling you about this one, because this will be showcased at the London Festival of Architecture. So in about 6 weeks' time, you're going to see this. The programme is going to go out on Channel 4 on it. So all of these things, it's not just about profile, it's actually developing something that there is a genuine need for, and then deploying our skills as architects to all the different sectors to see how we can make them work. So let's return to the office space, because this is something that I was really asked to talk about a little bit more this evening as well. What's going to happen? You know, that's the big question. So what's going to happen? How are we going to get back in? So I don't believe social distancing is the answer to this. It's only part of the answer. And if any of us have, which I'm sure we have, if you go shopping, you dutifully queue 2 meters apart from everybody to get into the supermarket. Once you're in there, it's a complete free-for-all. So social distancing requires a real change in our behavioural attitudes, and it will not be the only way that we can deal with contagions. Changing the way that we service our buildings, though, air temperatures, air changes, the amount of fresh air that comes in is all going to be really, really important. But the really important thing at the bottom there is that we must not lose sight of the sustainability agenda in all of this. We mustn't rush all the way now over to another thing, because again, I'll implore you, I do believe it is the key to what we're doing. So will we go back to this? Well, I don't think so. I think that evidence suggests that we're in the office because we want to interface with other people. So it isn't about just saying, well, let's pack everybody in again and we'll go back to working a certain way. We thrive on social interaction, and this photograph here is, if you normally go there at this time of year, this is absolutely rammed, but this was just before everybody was allowed to get together, but people still want to get together, and this is in King's Cross, I'm sure you're aware. We also love getting outside, so it's an absolute fundamental requirement. And I put this one in because it's in the city. This is a project we're doing at the moment, which is Adelaide House, but these old photographs I think are absolutely amazing. This is obviously the turn of the last century when this building was actually built. And we were already using our roof spaces, whether it was for a little game of putting that you can see up there, or for actually having a picnic. These places were already being used. So it's nothing super new that we wanted to do this. We've always wanted to do it. And the key thing is, how might we adapt it for going forward now? So this is a building that we're looking, which is the zero carbon tower building in New York. And it's relevant to what we're doing now because it addresses the sustainability agenda, but it also addresses the environment that we're going to go into in a post-COVID world. So it has to consider energy supply context, reduction in energy, but also the green open spaces that you have within those buildings. So access to fresh air and access to external space will be a key requirement in every sector that we do. Think about residentially. Those that are lucky to have a garden and can get out into it maybe haven't experienced a lot of the things that people who are living in multi-tenant flat shares in London are experiencing now. And a lot of our staff are telling us that yes, it's fine if you can get out, but if you can't, you need to get into an environment where you can socialise. So these spaces will become ever more important in the architectural response that we have and through the evidence-based design that we're actually producing. Simple measures in the short term are going to have to happen. So Internet of Things, the ability to gather data is going to be really, really important, but also testing. So this is a tricky area because the monitoring that we have of us in cities, there's been a fine line. How is that data used? But I think we're going to see a change in that now because it is going to be a requirement. It's already a requirement at airports. You've already seen the cameras testing people before they get onto planes. And I think we're going to see more of this. How long it will last? Who knows? But it will be something we see. But then there's really simple things. Things that should have been done years ago, like not having to open a door with your hand. Not having to go into a restaurant and go into the toilets and then find that you can't get out again because you've got to wait for somebody else to open the door, or you've actually got to wash your hands and then you've got to open the door and self-contaminate yourself again. There's some really, really simple things that can happen, and they all need to happen if we're going to get back into the office space in a really, really safe and secure way. So all of these measures we're working on with lots and lots of different people. There are films to put over handles. We can use sprays, we can use ultraviolet light to do it. So there's many, many different measures that will get employed to be able to get back into a work setting more safely. And think about when you're going down an escalator the next time. And the challenge is always been for me do I risk falling down it by not holding the handrail, or do I risk getting contaminated by holding that handrail? And we have to find a way around that. It isn't acceptable for us just to go, yeah, don't touch the handrail. We have to find a way that you can touch the handrail and safely. So those things are going to happen. The other thing I put in here is the behavioural change that's required. So why not take the stairs? Instead of taking a lift, let's take the stairs. And Leonardo da Vinci designed the double helix stair in Chateau Chambord, which I always thought was a really, really seminal way of being able to have two staircases where you don't actually have to meet with somebody. And this, on the bottom corner there, if you can see it, on the bottom right of the screen, is a scheme by Bernardini in Switzerland, which is a modern interpretation of that, which is a beautiful, beautiful scheme. This immediately will solve the challenge of not being able to pass people when you come up and down a stair. Now, whether we do that in every building, who knows? But they are those sort of clever ways that we're going to have to look at that. Whether the Paternoster lift will come back, well, that remains to be seen. But it is a way of addressing it. So we've got to look at all of these measures right now. There isn't going to be one thing that actually cures this. It's going to be the range of measures from all the bright, super intelligent people in all of the different sectors and professions that help us get through it. But one thing is for sure, having an internal environment that doesn't rely on fresh air or good air changes is going to have to change. And already the major developers, institutions, funds we're working with all accept that and are all looking at different ways of doing it. And whether we do it through displacement or naturally ventilation, there are super ways of actually doing that, and we're putting those into place at the moment. We're designing them. But the internal environment in the office space and also in any building is going to be incredibly important to make people feel safe and secure when they get back in. Because people are going to be less tolerant about living in and working in a poor environment. This is the Environment Agency's headquarters. We designed down in Oxfordshire, and I'll just finish with that one in a second. But the other thing that we could do is think about safety standards. So I could imagine that none of you watching this tonight, if you went into a restaurant and you saw a 0 or 1 or what have you as a hygiene rating, I don't think you'd stay in there very long. And yet we don't have that sort of criteria for offices. So what about having a well-being rating? I don't know whether you can see that. It's sort of obscured on my screen. But what about having a well-being rating where we have something whereby it can measure contagion protection? So how safe is this space for me to go into it? Has that restaurant thought about all the measures they have to put into it? The hotel, the office, the residence that I might be going into. And I do think that we're going to see something along those lines. And so we've designed a little badge there, which I can send to you if you're all interested with the ratings that we're considering. So that might come along. So then the final point on that is that we need to really reposition and explore our horizons. So on the right-hand side is the Environment Agency building, which we designed in 2004. That's the one I showed you that became the context of the British Council of Offices sustainability agenda in Paris in 2005. In 2020, this is the building that we are designing now. It's on the same site for the same client. It's timber, so it's cross-laminated timber, and it is super sustainable, both in carbon reduction, but also employing all the measures that I've talked about or touched on very briefly with you about how we could minimise the spread of contagions in buildings. So everything from clean air, from the way you get into it, the way you use it, its ability to be flexible. And the other thing that we really need to build into everything that we do is resilience, because resilience is going to be one of the key things that we're going to need going forward. So it's not going to last forever, but what's the future? So I've put a bit tongue in cheek, but this sort of summarises. I was trying to think, how could I summarise all of this research that we've been doing over and put it down into a very quick narrative of a few slides. So the first thing is that we're going to have to reposition. It's not going to be design the new normal, it's repositioning normality. So it isn't what's our new normal. I find that term quite strange to hear. It's repositioning what we conceive to be a normality. And the other thing is that we need to reimagine what those things once were. So it's not about saying, well, that didn't work, but it did. But we're going to have to do something else to think about how that worked. And resilience and flexibility to make those things work means that you're going to have lots of adaptations. And this is about something that was designed and was adapted and adapted and adapted, and it became something that was still relevant through its future. But also, we need to accept that there will be mistakes along the way. We must not think, we can't do that because will it work? We're going to need to try some things and accept that it won't always work. But more fundamentally, accept that there will be limits to some of the things that we can achieve in the certain times that we're going to have to be able to achieve them. So I'll leave you with two thoughts. And I passionately believe this. What we all do now will determine what the future looks like for us. We've seen the behaviour towards others, how we behave towards each others. All of these things will combine to define what it all looks for us and the future and how it will be. And the final slide comes back to technology, dear old Cedric Price, which I've always thought is fantastic. Technology is the answer. But what was the question? Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Darren. We're now going to move on to the Q&A session. And I've already got a few questions coming through, so I shall pose the first one if I might.
I'm going to try and stop sharing my screen.
Okay.
There.
Thank you. So the first one is from Master Alison Gowman. She says that I support green and sustainable recovery, but what evidence can you give to building owners and investors to show that green changes are viable and necessary?
Yeah, well, that's a very, very broad-ranging question. And I think there's two things to this. So a lot of the research and evidence that we're getting at the moment is that unless building owners and the city can demonstrate that there's a safe and secure environment for people to come back to, they're not going to come back. So this isn't a challenge where we can just say, well, I can't bear the cost of doing it. A lot of the schemes we're working on now, a lot of the occupiers saying we're not going to even think about coming back this year. So they're coming back 2021. So we have to find ways of providing the confidence that what they're coming back to is safe and secure. The green aspect to it, I think, it's a thing that we should be doing anyway. And the energy reduction that we've all signed up to in the carbon agenda, this is just going to make it happen a little bit quicker. We've all got used to clean air in the city, for instance. Everybody wants that to continue. So the green agenda, I don't think is one that, and I'm going to be a little bit sort of out there. I guess it's a sort of thing is, it's not so much thinking about what's the cost of doing it. I think we need to think about what's the cost of not doing it.
Thank you very much.
I'm pretty broad there, Valerie, because it's a difficult one to answer, but that's the view.
Well, here's another one. It's another real challenge, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Which is from Jonathan Louth, who's a member of the Architects Company.
Uh-huh.
And he says, assuming that we do move towards a technologically clean environment, how do we kind of counterbalance that? Because surely if we were to do that successfully, it would prevent children in particular from building up immunity against common diseases. And so we then might risk developing a population that has really low resistance, leading to increasing reliance on perfectly clean environments and greater vulnerability to pandemic.
Okay, well, I'm not a doctor, so and I think this for me almost strays into a little bit of the politics of, do we believe in herd mentality and actually exposing ourselves to it all and then building up immunity. I think that, and there's arguments for both. And again, I've read as much research on doing that is too successful as not doing it. And I think, we can look across the world on those aspects. But I think that the fundamental factor is that automation is coming. So it's not about sort of thinking about densities necessarily, as so much as there are going to be certain changes that happen quicker now that we're going to either embrace or say, that's just not for me. And again, that choice in society, that we maintain that choice, is really, really important. And I think, you know, one thing I would say is where this pandemic differs from others, and I'm trying to answer the question but in a broad sense, is when you think of previous pandemics, so tuberculosis, cholera, and the effect it may have had on our cities, COVID-19 is very, very different, because if you look back at what those pandemics did, they shaped our cities in a way because they either then meant we had better sanitation to actually deal with certain aspects. In the aspects of tuberculosis, if you look at New York as a good example, in 1908, that led to the whole change in the zoning system, so they didn't have the potential for high density elements coming together and the ability to, you know, for so many people to get contagions so rapidly. So parks sprung up, bigger areas, access to fresh air and all those sort of things. Where COVID, I think, is different is that it spread so quickly because we have so much access to travel now. I mean, it started in ski resorts, it's been prevalent in ski resorts. So it isn't specific to cities. It's actually a society thing. And it's because we actually do want to interact with people. We're a very social beings. And so you're not going to change that. And I think, you know, it's difficult to say, yes, we don't want to build up so that the minute you catch a cold, yeah, that's absolutely tragic. But I do think that we have to respond to this. We can't just say, oh, well, no, we're just going to let everyone get it. We've got to find responses that can deal with it.
Thank you. I have another question, this time from the Lord Mayor. And the Lord Mayor asks,
it's a tricky one.
In his Zoom calls, the older generation are happier at home, but the younger generation just want to come into the office and get out and about. How do we cope with blended working? How do we manage to get a sort of office corporate culture that can't just be maintained on or created on Zoom?
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I'm going to sort of say I'm not sure that that's absolutely accurate, Lord Mayor. So we've got as many of our younger generation actually saying, actually, we're really quite loving being at home and working from home. So let's think about, why is that? So what we've asked ourselves as a business, and I think this is where it's not about just changing the way we work, it's about changing our attitudes about how we want to work and defining, well, what do we mean by the office? So first you've got to think about, what is the office for? And then what do you want to do in it? And are those two questions compatible as answers that come flowing from that? And I think what we're going to see is that what's going to be much, much more important in everyone's lives is quality of life. So it's the balance between when you work. So what we're looking to do is have more of a culture of being task-based rather than hours-based. So you might have more of a university environment, for instance, in our studios, where you go in to collaborate. So you go in to collaborate with everybody. So you interface with people, you have fun whilst you're there. And it's almost like when you're a student, you used to go in, you have your crits, you meet up with all the people that you were working with. But sometimes the focus work can be done away from the studio, away from the office. So I think blended working and hybrid working is the way forward. For me, I think, you know, I've seen that I can be super effective working from home, and I don't necessarily need to be in the studio, but we all miss that social interaction. And that's the one thing that everybody misses. So I think that's where maybe we look at the age demographic and think, well, the younger generation are more social and they want to interact with their friends. I think it works on all sorts of levels. Everyone is finding this really difficult. So we have to find a way of making it so that you have more choice in your life. And I think because one size doesn't fit all, younger generation, whether you've got children, families, however you choose to live your life, I'll come back to this sort of aspect that, you know, certain people are loving it, yes, because they're thinking, well, I just could go out and work in the garden all day. But if you're in a multi-tenanted apartment in the centre of London and your only breakout space is the kitchen, you're all working from your bedrooms, That isn't so much fun. So, you know, there's so many different aspects that we're going to see. Will residential change? Will we have to provide access to open space? Will it be a fundamental requirement? And I think it will be. And I think that it all comes down, or comes all the way back to what I'll say again. We are all going to want a better quality of life out of this. And I think how we handle that and how we provide those spaces will lead to it.
Thank you very much. Here's one from Bob and Nikki. Are there things that we can easily do to upgrade the current office estate to make it more friendly in the post-COVID world?
100%.
What you're doing in your office.
Yeah, 100%. So what do we do? So we've looked at it as a space and set on 2 levels. We said, okay, so in the short term, we need to give people the access to get back into a work setting. So those people, let's not forget the mental well-being issues here as well, because a lot of people, and it is in our own company as well, are struggling with this. Mentally, they are struggling with being isolated from their friends or their colleagues, or just the normality of the life that they once knew. So we've tried to get people back into the studios as safely as we can in a timely way. So we said, look, it's just a space. We own a building in Covent Garden. And I've looked at it and said, right, okay, so let's just change it. Let's make it somewhere that has breakout spaces that you can actually use. So for us, what we've done, the simple things are, yes, you've got to self-distance in it for now, but that will change. That's not going to last for very long. So everything's at 2 metre distance. That costs you nothing. We haven't moved all the desks around. And actually, the take-up of going back, even though we've reduced the amount of people that can be in the office by 70%, we haven't got 30% at the moment that want to come back in. So what we're going to have is more like shift working, where we say, you know, if you want to work at home a few days, you can. If you want to work in the office, so we're going to make it more of a touchdown space, but also a collaboration space. None of that costs any money. I do think that giving people the access to cycling, though, is really, really important. I'm a cyclist, so you know I'll possibly have a slightly biased view on it, but I think given the ability, why do some people not cycle? Because there's no facilities in your office, perhaps, because you have to put your bike down in the basement. And so I've said, well, why put it down the basement? Why are we going to trundle it down all those stairs? Let's put them right in reception. It's all part of the agenda we got. It costs you nothing. So there are some really soft things to do. I think the difficult thing in the shorter term, though, is acknowledging that in the city and in central London right now, still, there really isn't a lot open. So the desire to go back in for many people isn't there, because you have to take everything in with you when you do go. And I think that's a challenge. But yeah, there's lots of things that don't have to cost any money to get people back in. If you've got an external terrace, really another good example. We do fortunately have one, and we're going to make it look like Ibiza, but we're going to put outdoor cabanas that you can then work outside. Because the worst thing working outside is you can't see your screen. So putting some shade to be able to sit out in the fresh air, or have some tables where you can hold a meeting out in the fresh air. Because let's not forget, hydroxyl radicals exist in the open air spaces. So the hydroxyl radicals are natural elements that kill off the pathogens in the air, but they aren't so prevalent inside buildings. They stop at about 1 metre, even if you have your windows open. So that's why it's much safer to be in an outdoor environment. And you know, keeping the windows open if you have a naturally ventilated office, switch off the air conditioning. We've changed ours by just changing one of the fans, taking one of the belts off. It meant that it's not recirculating the air. Simple things can be done in the short term. They're not long-term fixes, though, I would offer.
Thank you. Well done. You preempted another question, actually, from and Chris Dyson, who raised the question about bicycles and how people can travel more frequently using that mode of transport. There's more here, actually, that are on a slightly different theme, but they're kind of linked. One from Martin Muirhead, who says that he regularly hears the statement that firms won't fully return to offices until January 2021, and he has a suspicion that may be because actually the bars and the hospitality, all the other, the really important hospitality facilities that support offices aren't actually coming on until later. And he's rather worried about that also because, in the middle of winter, it's more likely that COVID will thrive. So the two things combine. And then Michael Dalton has a similar question, because he says, look, supporting the offices are particularly hospitality, all the restaurants, hotels, etc. And have you done any work specifically around this part of the built environment?
Yes, we have. And I think I'll try and answer both Martin's questions well, two parts, because he's absolutely right. It's fundamental that we get people back into the city, back into our cities in a safe way, so that people can interact. So there's a wellbeing level, and then there's an economic level. People need to be back out again, doing the things that brought them back into, that we all took as being normal society. And also there's this, it's a bit of a chicken and egg, because if people aren't in the city, then obviously there's no demand for the bars, restaurants and everything. But if it's not open, people aren't coming. And that's kind of where we're seeing it at the moment. But again, I do think that's changing. And we're now seeing sort of, and I sat with the CPA the other day, and I'm trying to encourage pop-ups, just as a way. We've got to find ways of drawing people back in. So are there pop-up restaurants, pop-up bars that can actually encourage more people in the short term? So turn the streets over to markets, perhaps, open air markets where you could buy food. So the people that actually own the restaurants, can they actually, in the short term, use the streets? So we close the streets and we make the streets the walking markets. So can we look at doing something like that? So that, for instance, is one aspect that we could look at. And I think that we can see a whole change in the demand then. On the hospitality side of things that you just raised, yes, our hospitality sector is looking at how do you get people safely back into a hospitality market that is saying that it's going to take 3 years to recover from where we are now. And so before travel comes, so international travel obviously will predicate where we go, but actually we could see now something very positive for our own country in terms of how we can get can have the ability to holiday or use the facilities we've got in our own country rather than everyone going abroad. I accept that we have a huge influx of tourists as well. So, you know, there's no one easy answer to this. But I do think that I've seen some really creative ways that people are trying to bring the hospitality industry, whether it's restaurants or bars or you know, small kiosks, to allow people the ability to actually have a drink or sit outside or interface with people. And yes, you know, we don't want to be doing this in the winter. It will be considerably more miserable than it is right now. But then we'll have to find new norms and new ways of doing that. Maybe we have to cover some of the streets and do certain things. But I don't really think that that's where we're headed. But I do think that we all have to work together. So this isn't about, you know, just how do we do it, how do you do it, this is about us all coming together, combining ideas. And I think the city could be seen as a real pilot for this. And I think if some of the streets were shut down and bars, and there were open air bars that people could go out into, rather than having to go into the bars, they could still be run by the people who actually have the franchise of each of the bars. I think that would be seen as a really positive thing that the city is doing to pump prime a return to work policy. So there are, and that's just a few of the things. But so I think ultimately, Valerie, it's down to us to do it. I think, you know, the public won't just come and go, yeah, okay. You know, we have the ability to make these changes. So we've got the ideas. So let's see if anybody wants to embrace those ideas and then just keep pushing at them. But I'd love to see the city doing something like that. And I think, you know, I don't have the power to do that. You know, I'm an ideas man. But I certainly would like to work with people who would like to see, well, how can we, you know, make this happen in maybe just in a limited capacity. I mean, I think there's a little bar I designed at the top end of Cheapside. It was now over 20 years ago. It's a little Costa Coffee. There's a gold wing roof on it. And it's an outdoor, I called it the dining wall. It's tiny. But it's an outdoor space. And it was predominantly done so that you went in, got your coffee, and you stood outside. And that type of thing, I think, would be really effective. Perhaps, you know, to see more of those springing up around to allow people to get socialising again. That's what we really need to do.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to pose just one last question, actually, before we close. But thanks to everybody who did send in questions. I can see a good question from Sue Green, who's Master of the Wax Chandlers. There's a very interesting one also from Martin Pickard. But I'm going to pose two that are linked again, actually.
I have to try and remember both then.
Yes, well, they are definitely linked.
Okay.
One, again, is from our renter warden, who says, look, how can we make the City of London a world leader at sustainably restoring our economy and our city? And what can architects and the livery company do to help the City of London? And then the allied question is from, oh my goodness me, Chris Chivers, who says, as much as our investment funds in the UK come from successful economies around the world, how do we convince them, this is overseas investors, that our view on sustainability is the right one for the future?
Okay.
So it's a perspective, international one.
Yeah, this could be a really long answer. And those that work with me know me. I could easily make this a long answer, but I'm not going to. I think what you've seen in all we're trying to do, the answer to this is we have to restore confidence. And so the answer to the first question was, it's incumbent upon us to make people feel confident that the city is a safe working environment, that the measures have been taken to get people in safely, whether that's staggered transport patterns, whether it's turning the streets over to bicycles. However we do it, there's a range of measures that can be deployed. And I think that we are all very, very clever and smart enough as a city. We are the best city in the world. And employing all of these different ways of doing it, then we will get a huge number of people coming back quickly. For the record, I don't really believe the figures of 2021 till anyone comes back. The changes that I'm seeing even in the short term, it's just going to exponentially rise. People will not just sit at home when they can go out and come back into the city. So I don't believe that's true. And the other aspect, I think on the broader funding aspect, well, you know, funding happens as a global economy, what we've seen and how we're interfacing now. I've been on calls today with Saudi Arabia, Oman, Russia, wherever it might be. So a lot of projects we're doing, New York, wherever it might be, we're doing something. We've actually found a really effective way to work. And I think the funds still see, in fact, I know, the funds see London as a safe place, and we provide that confidence to them that in the spaces we design, the buildings that we design, the actual facts that we are thinking about these, and it's not just us, there's so much research going on out there from so many different fantastic global world-leading companies that are considering this aspect, and it will gather pace. It's a bit like a snowball, it's going to gather pace. And I think that in a shorter period than perhaps is being defined at the moment, we'll see that confidence return, but it won't just return on its own. We have to make it happen.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a brilliant answer to a very tough question. So at the very beginning of this evening, I said that on the 26th of March, the Right Honourable the Lord Mayor sent a letter to the Masters of Livery Companies saying, we need to ensure that the livery's response to the coronavirus crisis can muster the full force of our collective experience and expertise. And this lecture was part of the response from the Architects Company to that rallying cry, and what a response it was. So I extend my heartfelt thanks to the Lord Mayor for introducing tonight's lecture, and to Darren Comber for your fantastic talk this evening. It was interesting, thought-provoking, and a really worthwhile presentation. But I also want to thank each and every one of you for attending tonight's event. We face a challenge of unprecedented scale, but as members of livery companies, we are bound together in the spirit of fraternity and stand firm as we tackle the coronavirus pandemic and help to rebuild our economy together. So I now declare the lecture closed, although Zoom will remain open until 8 o'clock if you want to socialise with other guests and would like to swap to gallery view. So this is the time to switch on your cameras But somebody, one of our members, Jonathan, has just sent a bit of a quip. He says, gosh, masks or face coverings on, please, just before the segment of the evening. So enjoy. Thank you very much indeed.
And thank you very much.
Thanks, Darren. Thank you. And all the faces start to come in.
Goodness, there's so many people. It's definitely better not being able to see everybody. Although what I would say is, you know, it's quite an interesting dynamic, because the one thing, and this sort of comes back sort of into this whole Zoom culture that we've got here at the moment. This, you know, sort of the fact that you get no feedback. So because you're not interacting with anybody, and this is how meetings, you know, are so difficult. When you're doing it over a screen and you are, whether it's presenting, whether it's trying to communicate ideas with people, it's very, very difficult when you know, you can't see any feedback. The person's face, do they like what I'm telling them? Do they like the design that I'm doing? How do I work with them? How do I engage with that person? And I think, you know, that's the big piece that we're really, really missing out of our lives right now. So yes, we can carry on our jobs. Yes, we could keep working at home till 2021. But I'll ask you the question, do you really want to? And the answer that comes back is no, because we thrive on social interaction. And I think, you know, that's just so really, really important, because you cannot build a DNA of a country or culture by all being locked away. DNA and culture of a company or a country built on social interaction. And we've seen some of the, without straying into, you know, some negative things that can happen, you know, whether it's through, as I say, mental well-being and the sort of things that we might see out the end of this. I think, you know, we have to be very, very cautious. And that's why I want everybody to sort of, you know, that's why the confidence in the city, I think, relies, you know, we can be the people that really push it forward. But yeah, it's difficult on a screen, isn't it? And we're all finding it.
But Darren, I just got to say, your line about, you know, a safe place and provide the confidence to them, to your Saudi Arabian friends, and I find that, or Oman or Russia, is something that's coming across loud and clear.
Yeah.
I love your line, repositioning normality, which with your permission, I would like to take that, because I think it's a great line.
100%, but Lord Mayor, only if you credit it to me and say, I heard this.
Of course. Well, I won't say I heard it from, but I know your Costa coffee shop, which I think is a marvellous one. No, very well. But the question I was going to ask, which we didn't cover, which is very close to my heart, and you may not have looked at it, is what are we going to do about the arts and culture and the theatre? And I'm hearing social distancing is going to go from 2 to 1 meters. But, you know, that and the tourism that comes to London is such a critical part as well. Yeah. Have you looked at that in any way?
Well, I think in many respects, it comes into, it's not directly correlated, but there's some crossovers with what we're doing in the transport industry, so with airport design. And because, you know, we can get people on planes still, so how we're looking at getting airports open again, the testing that's going to be required. And I think we're going to have to accept that you know, the behavioural changes that we're going to just have to accept. If we want to go to the theatre, you're going to have a temperature check. You might have to wear a face mask or something like this for a period of time. And I've shifted my view on this, and again, I don't want to get political in any sense, but, you know, I was 3 months ago, somebody asked me the question, I did an interview, and somebody said, you know, so if you have to wear, do you think face masks are a good idea, Darren? Will you be suggesting that all your staff go into the office with face masks? My reaction was, I think if we have to then go and wear face masks, we haven't dealt with the core of the issue, because we're trying to deal with it almost at the leaf rather than at the root. I still believe that, but conversely, if that makes you feel more comfortable about being around somebody, then perhaps we need to rethink that. And it relies on us all doing it. And now that we've seen everybody doing it on, you know, transportation, maybe that's what we have to do in, you know, theatres, perhaps, you know, to get people back into them. So look at a range of measures. So I do think there will be ways of doing it. And, you know, we love the theatre. We're going to find a way. But yeah, it's a challenge. I do think it's a.
Well, I think the way, maybe just because is from what I'm seeing, there are lots of apps around, test apps. So you have a test, and then you get sent. So when you go to the theatre, you have to show your app to say I'm tested, I'm clean, and you can go into the theatre. And I think that's the way. It's all test. That ultimately is going to make it easier, from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think this is the same way about getting onto an aeroplane at the moment. That you sort of we always have this misconception that getting onto an airplane, so the air, you can catch diseases on the airplanes through the air, and that's actually not really the whole story. The air on an airplane is actually super clean because it's filtered and cleaned and cleaned. You're more likely to capture germs off the tray that's in front of you. Something like 80% more likely to catch them off that. So, but it's not going to stop us traveling, but we're going to want to get that confidence back. So I keep using that word, I guess, it's how do we make people confident that they will get onto an aeroplane. And prior to this, pretty much every week I was on an airplane, I was traveling. I tried to keep my travel down, clearly for all of the right sustainable reasons, but because we're a global business, it's reliant that I had to do a lot of traveling, and I've not been on a plane for the last 4 months now, and even I sort of think, and I know that people who travel as much as me, they travelled recently and they said, you know what, I was a bit anxious about getting on that plane. So I think that we're all going to find that when we first do it, it's going to be strange. But that's how behavioural change takes us into it. Once it's I nearly used that new norm myself, the repositioned normality, we will think, yeah, well, that's just the way it is now. And it won't be like this forever. I have a pretty positive view on life that, I look at it and think, yeah, okay, well, this is what I've got to do now, but it won't always be like this. And we'll find a new way. And, hopefully there'll be better things that come out of it. But yeah, I would like to see those open as quickly as possible. I feel like others can interact with each other. I know Valerie wants to be a position where other people are sort of. I know it's very, very difficult on Zoom, but I hope people have found it of interest. I would reiterate what Valerie said there perhaps earlier, that we don't have all the solutions, or the ideas, but combined with everybody else in the industry, whatever it is that you might be doing or whatever you can contribute through the design research unit, perhaps there's a way that we can look at all sorts of different aspects of it. And
I think, Darren, I just wanted to say that I was really encouraged to hear a lot of what you're doing at Scott Brownrigg. I've been asked to chair a Design Futures initiative at the Royal Incorporation of Architects in Scotland next week. And that came off the back of my frustrations with, I suppose, the architectural response, or what I was seeing from an architectural response in Scotland. And it was more to do with architects not being part of the conversation. We saw the doctors, the scientists, the economists, all on the post-pandemic recovery groups, but there was no urbanists, there was no architects. And for me, it certainly is about how we position ourselves within the industry now. So after writing a few emails and speaking to a few people, I found myself now chairing this group next week. So similar to the Lord Mayor, I will be quoting you.
Well, I think, do you know, it's interesting because as a profession, there's so many skills, different skills that people have as architects, whether it's, creativity or project management, all sorts of different things, and we all have different skills in how we come into it. What I found, and I reached out to quite a lot of other architects at the beginning of this, and I had a bit of a mixed reaction. I had some people that were all about self-preservation, which I get. It's all about, I'm not going to share everything. But we had the attitude as a company, we said, look, our business has been founded on sharing knowledge. So this is when we have to exponentially now, everything we do in our research, we are going to publish and share with everyone. We're not just going to go, oh, this is our commercial property, and this is how we're going to get some sort of commercial edge coming out of this. And it's proved to be the right thing, because the people that have then really embraced that attitude have been have added so much richness to it. So, you know, again, you know, those people that see the way out of this, and I think for me, and I think this is a business sense as well, because I know there's a lot of business leaders here this evening as well. I'll come back to that quote that I said, how you behave now is how your customers will perceive you out the other end. And that's not why we're doing it, but it's, if you are doing the right things, then as night follows day, you'll be the people, the profession or whatever, that people say, yeah, when it all went wrong, who really picked up the mantle? The architects. They really went out there. They looked at how they could make a difference. Did they make a difference? No, maybe in some areas they didn't, but they certainly did try to do it. And they didn't just sit back and watch a box set. So, you know, it's kind of that sort of attitude that, you know, we all have it within ourselves to make a difference. And it can be in a really small way as well. So, but yeah, I wish you luck on that, because we have an office in Edinburgh, and by all means, if they can support you and you want to reach out to within that office, I'm sure they'd love to support you.
Yeah, perfect. I might get in touch afterwards then, yeah.
Yeah, no, please do, yeah, no, good.
Well, perhaps I should ask the two questions that we didn't. There was Sue Beer from the White who basically asked, you know, given what's happened with the pandemic, do we think that the era of the big city is maybe over, and that actually people would prefer to work and live in smaller towns, or, you know, in more rural environments and so on? What's your view on that? What's the future of this?
I'll give my view, and then I'm going to open it up to everybody else to give a view, if that's okay.
Surely, great.
Yeah, you know, so very quickly, I think that there's, again, lots of people will want both. So the city's never going to die. You know, people want to be around people. Density in cities, it's how do we do it safely? I come back to that in New York. You know, they found ways of doing it. We found ways of addressing the city, and the city will thrive out of this. But also, a lot of people, you know, if the whole community aspect of, you know, being able to get food within a small radius of your, you know, town centre, or, you know, if a village, that can happen in cities as well. You know, you don't have to travel miles to get your food. So I think they'll coexist nicely together, and maybe we'll see a blend of it, and, you know, cities will develop differently. So yeah, I have a positive view, and I guess how much it affects a city is how long this goes on for, and I think that's the key thing, and that's the thing that we can't answer. And when music comes in, it always brightens up the evening as well. So it's not the accordion that you've got there. So anyway, that's my view. I'll throw it open to anybody else to give us some views. It'll be really interesting to hear other people.
Yes, well, Michael, you've got your hand up. Michael Guns.
Yeah, if I may, I'm going to show my age now, I'm sorry to say, but back in, Darren may know this, but back in the 60s, maybe the early 70s, the government set up something called the Location of Offices Bureau. And the idea was to try and get everybody to move out of the city, move out of London, move out of Manchester, move out of Birmingham, get into the country, or certainly into the provinces. And it had quite a good take-up. Lots of offices went out. But sadly, the employers found that the employees were liking it far too much. They were getting too relaxed. They were wanting to go off at 5 o'clock and play games and play with the football and the children and everything else. And so the production dropped off. And what happened, of course, businesses started coming back into the big cities where they could rub with each other and all the other businesses and what have you. It became too localized. And I think that is what we are going to see. Yes, there are going to be some people that want to work at home sometime, but I think both employers are going to want to have them back in their eye so they can see them, give a bit of motivation, a bit of drive and what have you. I think that the offices we will probably have to adapt and have to adopt new ideas, but I think it will survive. That may be controversial, but I think that's what's going to happen.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to contribute to that? We're on our 5-minute bell, just like a theatre. So
Yeah.
I'm going to be cheeky. I'm going to ask Nick Naidu. You're one of our younger members, and I know you didn't have your hand up, but what do you think about the future of cities? Let's hear from a architect.
Yes, well, it's a good question. We've actually been doing some studies ourselves. So I work for a firm called AFK. We're a reasonably new firm in the city, and we've been looking into this ourselves, and we've been doing our own surveys. And I think everyone agrees that the genie is out of the bottle with this idea of working from home, and it does put into question what's going to happen to our offices. I mean, we've had some wonderful suggestions. We think our office should become almost a gallery space, a gallery and collaboration space where clients can come and see what kind of work we do, and we can come together, and it becomes a space for our, well, not branding, but culture, I suppose, as an office. And I think office spaces will transform. I think there will be a need for them, and we'll have to work hard to keep them, I think, because people are comfortable working from home. So you're going to have to incentivize them to come back into the office, I think. But yes, I think there is something to say for social interaction. We are human beings. We like to meet and talk. So I think that will cause some drive. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, well done, Nick. Thank you. And can I ask you, Lord Mayor, what do you see as the future of the City of London?
So I'm optimistic, rather like Darren. I think the office isn't dead. I think you can't create a corporate culture without the office. You can't create a corporate culture over Zoom. And when Darren answered my question, it was interesting. But the particular area, which is 27% of financial services in the square mile, is Lloyd's. And the surveys they've done, all the Lloyd's insurance brokers want to come back, the young ones, because they feel they're missing out on the networking. You know, we've done that networking. The elder generation is happy at home, but the younger generation they want to network. They want to have that social aspect where and networking is an important part of the culture and how you move within the firm and learn from the likes of yourselves and senior people. So I'm pretty optimistic, but I also agree that, I think there's going to be some huge adapting, and maybe people come in for 3 days a week and don't work at home for 2 days a week. But coming back to the point about productivity from Michael, in the surveys that Deloitte's have done, productivity has gone up since COVID-19 and people have been working at home, funnily enough. Now, that may be just because of 3 months, but we've had some wonderful weather and productivity has gone up, but that may not last forever. So it is an interesting balance, but I'm optimistic, because I think London is the greatest city in the world and will maintain that. And it's wonderful to hear what Darren has to say about the confidence in London. And I've taken my notes, and Darren, your name will be quoted in a number of meetings. But I have to say, this has been fascinating, and well done, the architecture company of architects. You've done it's a great lecture, and it fills me, makes me very optimistic. So thank you.
No, thank you very much indeed. I think we're going to close the evening now, but thanks again, Darren, for your...
Well, thank you for inviting me.
And for the incredibly insightful lecture. It was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lord Mayor and Lady Mayor.
Thank you. Look forward to meeting you in person, Darren.
Yes, indeed, one day.
Okay. Thank you, Valerie. Lovely to see you.
Thank
you.
Yes. Thank you very much.